Well, hello, we're back again. And as you can see, my good friend, Odon Lafontaine. How are you, Odon? Good to have you back. You're still there. I can see you. I hope you got your pipe ready because we're going to be doing something that you have promised. Oh, there it is. We're going to do something you promised you were going to do, and we haven't done it for a long time, and that is to go back to the coins. For those people who don't know, over a year ago, I started looking at the coins in 2020, about December, January 2020. I was, because of a snafu that we saw at the British Museum back in 2019 when Hatun took me down to the galleries there. And we thought we saw a wrong coin that had been titled by whoever the curator for that particular gallery. Came back, was going up and looking at all the different coins and getting as much information as I could, and I found out that I was correct, that the title for that had been put on this coin with the Shahada on it had been given to Muawiyah when it should have been given to Abdul Malik from 692, not from 661. So as I was putting up these coins, I kept on coming across all these articles written by Europeans and Americans too on how the coins progressed in the 7th century, and many of those who were doing the research and writing the articles were trying to impose the Islamic traditions onto those coins. They were trying to take that narrative, the Standard Islamic Narrative, and they were trying to enforce it onto the coins, and it just wasn't making sense. And I could see that they were frustrated. I was frustrated. So I started unpacking, saying, hold on a minute, why are we using the Standard Islamic Narrative to interpret those coins? Why don't we just interpret the coins, just look and read them, and start saying what they're telling us? And then from that, try to then create the narrative, a 7th century narrative, not a 9th and 10th century narrative. And as I was doing that, many of you were starting to write and were starting to respond in the comment section. And one person was Odon. You were there, and I saw your name there, and you were thanking me for borrowing some of your pictures. I didn't even know they were your pictures, but you had these great pictures. In fact, you're going to show some of them today with red squares around it and green oblong shapes or other different shapes, and I was looking at them, and they were perfect for what I was trying to, the message I was getting across. But I didn't know you. I didn't realize that you've been working on this for almost 12 years. This is really your bread and butter. This is really your area of expertise. And so now I wanted to get you back to actually unpack, because I just was scratching the surface. This is not my area of expertise. This is not something that I'm not a numismatist. You're not a numismatist either. But you have used people like Volker Popp and others who are numismatists, who are much better in this material. And you have actually gone through and you have shown a sequence, which I've asked you to do today. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to those coins that we had talked about let's see. Way back at the last year in 2020. Now, this is a 2021 rendition. Actually, you're not going to, for those of you who probably don't know, Odin and I have already recorded this, and I lost the recordings. They went out into iTunes, took them away, and they grabbed them and they threw them out by accident. It was my fault, but I had no idea what I was doing. So this is a re-recording, and to your delight, it's actually going to be better than the previous recording, because Odon has had time to actually add to it and embellish it and come up with better applications to it, including some newer pictures. So this is actually a better recording than what we did 2 weeks ago. So Odon, thanks a lot. Sorry that we're having to redo this again, but you have improved upon it, and you're going to toke us. And what you're going to do, and there's going to be a number of things. We're going to have to break up this first episode into 2 sections, because there's just so much material to unpack. And I've asked them specifically to do that. We don't want this to go on to hours long. We want this to try to keep it to 20 to 30 minutes for each of these episodes. The first episode, what Odin's going to do is go through and show the sequence of what was happening with the coins in the 7th century, up until the time of Abdul Malik, up until around 685. And then from 685, we're then going to do a second episode where we're going to actually then go from Abdul Malik, because he is important, all the way up then into the Abbasid period, just following the coins. Now, he has also done, I've asked him to do this, and he's done an amazing job of putting it together on a graph. So as we go through, he will be introducing this graph where he'll be putting the coins in sequence. So you will see them in sequence. When we get to the end, grab that graph. All of you, take that graph make sure you get a screenshot of it and use it in your talks with Muslims. And those Muslims, I want you to look at the graph, because you will see the whole argument will be in just one graph. Everything that Odon's going to say, once you hear it, once you get the background behind it, once he unpacks it, and once he looks and shows you the sequence of what the coins are saying, you'll need to have that graph to then share with others and teach it yourself or use it in your own discussions, because this is a kind of a cheat sheet. We call these cheat sheets in English, which we would take to tests with, we put under our hand and look at all the answers, because everything is there on one page. And Odon, thank you so much. You've done us a real favor by putting this together. This is an act of love, and you've certainly took an awful lot of time to do it. But good to have you back, and good to have you on a subject that people have been asking and waiting for. This is going to open up a whole new genre. We've looked at the coins tertiary, not really unpacked them that much. We've looked at the Qiblas. We've looked at the inscriptions. We're going to be soon with Mel has looked up at all the paintings, looked at the sequence of the paintings. Now we're going to look at the sequence of the coins. And it's the coins that are going to show us that the Standard Islamic narrative has some problems. Because the Standard Islamic narrative assumes that everything we're going to look at in the 7th century, from the time of 632 on, from the time of the death of Muhammad, and the caliphate started in 624, so really from 624 on, was controlled by Islam, and that Islam was very strong. It controlled that whole area. By the time that you have Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, by the time that Muawiyah comes to power in 661, all the land from Tripoli in the west to Afghanistan in the east was under their control, and they monopolized. They controlled everything, which means they controlled the coins as well. They controlled the whips. And listen, if they did control from Tripoli all the way to Afghanistan, then they did control the mints, because the mints were in what is today Syria, and in Lebanon, and Israel, and parts of Jordan over in the west, and over in the east, they were all in what is today Iran. So those countries are way up in the north. Those mints where the coins were made are not down in the south. We're not down in Mecca and Medina, not in the Hijaz, not in Arabia at all. Why? Well, for one very good reason, like we've been saying, like a broken record. There's no water down there. Where there's no water, there's no vegetation. If there's no vegetation, there are no people. If there are no people, there are no towns. If there's no towns, there are no cities, there are no civilization, and there are no mints, because you need people to have coins, and you need mints to then give them coins, and there's no civilization there to really accommodate any coins that far south. So with that in mind, knowing that everything we're looking at is in the north, up here, over in the west, up here in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, and over here, Iraq, and then Iran. If knowing that, keep that in your head as Odon speaks, because he's going to be talking about this area up in the north, not down here in the Hijaz. And it's that shows us, really, we're going to show you a whole nother genre of how Islam evolved, or how Islam came to be. And it's not the story that the Standard Islamic narrative has been telling you. It confronts it on almost every level. Not only the geographical level, also look and see what's happening politically. And Odon is going to be amazing. It's amazing what he's going to show you, because he's going to show you what's happening politically. And because once you look at what's happening politically, you'll understand that how Islam came to be formed. It was really a political and a theological intertwining mesh that was happening all at the same time. But the coins are going to show us where the politics go. However, on the coins will be theological reference points. And Odon's going to show you that as well. God bless you. So good to have you back again, Odon. Over to you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. At first, I just want to say that I'm not you said it yourself, I'm not an expert on coins and numismatics, but I am a sort of expert on the big picture, or the outline of what happened. And coins are very useful for getting a sort of image of what happened, because they don't change.
Yeah.
And when you get a coin, you have a sort of tiny window opening on what happened 1400 years ago. Well, and this is why coins and also inscriptions, statues, real hard evidence. And this is what I intend to do, to use it to show you the big picture.
You are being humble. You say you're not an expert, and no one says that you are a numismatist first and foremost. But what you're doing is what the numismatists are not doing. You're actually going and asking the questions that's on the coin. You're looking at the coin as is, and you're saying, let's interpret the image. Let's look at the inscription. Let's look at the dates. Let's look and see who these people are, where they are, what's happening, and what theological or what religious characteristics are going on here. That's what you're doing, which the numismatists, who are the experts, are not doing. So in some ways, no, I wouldn't say that you're an expert in this, but you're being humble. You're actually doing what I've asked and what we should, on what every historian should ask, and that is, stop imposing the interpretation, the standard Islamic narrative, the sin narrative. Let's let the coins speak for themselves. Thank you for doing.
I also should add that I will speak with a knowledge in mind, a knowledge of the context. I have already worked on the Quran, for example. We did videos on this. I've worked on the historical context, for example, by reading Robert Hoyland's book In God's Path. I've worked on the religious and theological context also. And we will see, because I will start with Muhammad, that there is something to take from the knowledge of the context. And I would like also to add that my presentation, the PowerPoint, as a PDF file, will be available on my website, which is thegreatsecretofislam.com, and it will be.
I'm just putting it down here so everybody can see it.
Everybody will be able to download it and to especially look at the final picture, the final slide of the complete chart, the complete graph you told us about.
This is the cheat sheet that we're creating for you. Odon has purposely created just for you, and it's a great thing to have. We're going to start from here out, these cheat sheets, so that you can tuck them up, put them in your Bible, put them in your Quran. So when you get into a discussion, you can then say, here it is. And then what you all need to do, and this is what I say to all my students, memorize what's on the cheat sheet and then just walk the person through it. And you can see then where you need to go with it. God bless you. Thanks a lot, Odon.
Okay, so let's get to it. So I've chosen this very odd title for my presentation, and you will see why. From Jesus to the caliphs, ruling in the name of the Messiah, as a messianist power. First of all, I want to start at not the beginning of the 7th century, but let's say the 630s. Because during the 630s, we have sources who tells us about a certain man or men called Muhammad or MHMT. And according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, he should be Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. But since we have only this evidence from this time to try to understand what Muhammad means, we will see that it might not be what the Standard Islamic Narrative claims. You remember, Jay, that I've introduced some sources in previous videos talking about Muhammad, the documents of Sebeos and others. But really, what does Muhammad mean? According to the Standard Islamic Narrative, it means the praised one, the one who is to be praised, the one who is praised. But according to the linguists, it is not the same, because the HMD root at first did not mean to praise. It meant to desire, to covet, or even to cherish. So the Muhammad is the desired one, the coveted one, the beloved one. And we have an example of this in the Bible, which is very interesting and very relevant, because Muhammad is the name that the angel Gabriel gave to the prophet Daniel. Here in Daniel 10:11, and also in other passages, other verses, we can see that in Hebrew, Daniel is called Ish Hamudot. Ish Hamudot is the man who is greatly beloved, the man who is greatly desired, the man who is greatly coveted. So it is the name, the very name of Daniel. And Daniel is not any prophet. Daniel is the one who makes a prophecy about the coming of the Messiah and the second coming also of the Messiah. So Daniel is kind of a precursor of the Messiah. And one could really ask what it means to be called precursor of the Messiah, because we saw in previous videos about the general context of the 7th century, where people thought that the end of times was near, and that the Messiah was about to come. So it might mean that the Muhammad who was described in the ancient sources was not the prophet of Islam, but someone who was preaching the imminent coming of the Messiah. And we also find this in the Hadith. In the Hadith, we find that Muhammad was preaching the imminent return of the Messiah, not the return at the end of times, centuries and centuries after him, but an imminent coming. Besides, I will just have one point on the sort of drift in the meaning from coveted one, desired one, into praised one. I will refer your audience to an article from Edouard Marigalet, who explains that there was a drift, a shift in meaning made by the people who invented the Standard Islamic Narrative in order to get better apologetics with the Quran and to try to have the Jesus of the Gospels announce the coming of Muhammad as the Prophet of Islam as being the Paraclete, which is a complete forgery, which doesn't work at all. But I will just leave the reference here for people who want to read it. You can find it on Edouard Marigalet's Academia webpage. And maybe we should have a standalone video on this, because it's an interesting point. Anyhow, either way, this is the graph, the chart that you were speaking about, Jay. And this thing, the starting point. The starting point is the historical Muhammad, or the historical Muhammads, because we don't know whether it was one man or several men who bore this title. And we see that it might be that most probably that the one who are the ones who bear this title were consider themselves as as a sort of new Daniel. They were forerunners of the Messiah, precursors who announced the coming of the Messiah. Thereafter, we find evidence in the coins of something very strange. This is what I've put up here with this title. We find evidence that the Arab leaders, the one who minted the coins, were kind of, were not independent rulers. They were not like the caliphs that are described in the Standard Islamic Narrative, because they used the very same coins as the empires they were supposed to fight, or they were supposed to have defeated. And so I think the best hypothesis to explain this is that those Arab leaders were kind of auxiliaries to the Byzantine and the former Persian Empire. We will see this especially by looking at the patterns that they used for their coins. Here, I have put up some Byzantine coins from the 6th and 7th century. And we will see that those patterns will be used by the Arab rulers to mint their own coins. I shall come back here whenever needed. But here we have a folis or a fal with the big letter M here. M is in Greek for numos, which means 40. We have always the same pattern, or often the same pattern, with an emperor figure bearing the crown, with a kind of scepter, or an orb with, here you can see a cross, here also a cross. Here we have a gold solidus from Heraclius, and we see he's wearing the crown with a cross on it. He's also he's having a sort of cross in his hand. Here we see this very particular design of a Byzantine cross. And here we have the figure of a standing emperor. Here is Justinian II, standing with a cross in his hand. And we will see that the Arab rulers use the very same pattern for their coins. For example, look at this coin. So here we have such a coin with a sort of Christian pattern. It has been studied by Clive Foss in an article in Aramco World named Coins of True Realms. And really, when you look at such a coin, it looks very much like a Byzantine coin. It looks like a Christian coin. You can see that there are Christian symbols. Here we have the M for the fals or the numos. We have here an emperor figure standing with a staff and a cross on his crown, and maybe here in the background another cross. But this coin was not minted by Christians or Byzantine. It was minted by the Arab power in the Levant between 640 and 660. This is what Clive Foss established. And so here we have a coin which could have been minted by maybe Umar or Uthman, according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, or even Ali. But it is not an Islamic coin. It is a Christian coin, and it is a Byzantine coin, which it is a coin which abides by the Byzantine Empire pattern,
okay,
which tells us.
Interrupt you here, because a lot of people are going to question what you've just said. In the past, we have always assumed that the coins were Christian because of crosses. You're now saying that this is not the case. This could easily be a Muslim coin, and this could be Uthman or Ali or even Abu Bakr that could be minting this coin.
No, I'm saying just the contrary. Okay. I'm saying that it might have been Umar or Uthman or Ali's coins according to the chronology of the Standard Islamic Narrative, but it tells us also that those Arab rulers were not Muslims then, or were not very Muslims.
Okay,
because they use crosses.
All right, so make sure that everybody understands what you're saying, because you're going to have a lot of people who are going to type in and say, so Odon does believe in the Standard Islamic Narrative. You're not agreeing with the you're not saying that this supports the Standard Islamic Narrative at all, are you?
Not at all.
Okay.
Should the Standard Islamic Narrative be true, we should see Islamic symbols, or at least we shouldn't see crosses.
Yeah.
According to the Standard Islamic Narrative, according to the Hadith, the cross is a vile symbol. Cross are supposed to be broken by Jesus when he will come back.
Okay. Odon, let me ask you this then. The Standard Islamic Narrative assumes that at this time, when this coin, this is 640 to 660, this is the Rashidun period, this is the time of the rightly guided caliphs, this would be Umar, Uthman, and Ali, the last three of the caliphs, the time period you're looking here, just before Muawiyah takes over. These are Arab coins from the same area that if, now I'm saying if, this is what you didn't say if, that's why I think people are going to be confused. If the Standard Islamic Narrative is true, these would be their coins. And what I see is, if the Standard Islamic Narrative is true, and there was an Uthman or Umar, Uthman, and Ali from 634 up until 661, they would not have coins like this, because they would have no Muslim would ever have a cross on their coins.
Exactly. There's something wrong with the Standard Islamic Narrative.
Okay.
It tells us that the most Muslim of the Muslims were the Rashidun caliphs, and they used crosses on the coins.
Now,
and besides, there are two points that I want to make here. The first one is the points about Christian symbols. That's one point. And the other is about the Byzantine Empire pattern. Okay. This is also very important. You see, when you use a certain coinage, a certain currency, it means that you are still in the sphere of influence of the power that invented those currencies, that invented those coinage. When you use Byzantine coins or Byzantine Empire pattern coins, it means that you are still within the Byzantine Empire. You might be a little independent, but you are not completely independent from the Byzantine Empire, because your monetary system is not independent. And we have the very same situation with many countries nowadays who use, for example, the American dollar without being American, and they are kind of infeuded, or they are not completely free.
I just came from El Salvador last month, and all the currency was American dollars. Old, beat up and very well worn American dollars that had come from America, and they were using them there. I know Liberia in Africa, they use the American dollar. There are quite a few countries that still use the American dollar. You have the example in France where the CFA, that I remember for 5 years, we used the CFA. That is a it's a West African consortium of countries that were all prior French colonies, and the currency itself, even the notes are actually, as I understand, printed in France for the West African countries. We have also the Commonwealth. Those of us who know about the Commonwealth, they're in Britain. I grew up in a Commonwealth country, India, and of course, though we don't use we mint our own currency now. Certainly, there are others who have even Britain mint their currency for them, hugely in this the case of poor countries. So you're saying that in the 7th century, these were still under the Commonwealth of the Byzantines, and so they were still using the currency of the Byzantines.
Exactly. They were within the sphere of influence of the Byzantine Empire. They were still in it. And this is very understandable when you look at the real context. We know that the Byzantine Empire used Arabs as auxiliary troops. And so the Arabs that took power in the Levant were those very troops. There might have been some Arabs also coming from Arabia or other places. But you see, the Arabs were already there. And in a sense, what we saw during the so-called Arab conquest was not as much a conquest as a shift of power. The Byzantine Empire kind of left, and but the power, the structures stayed in place, and the Arab auxiliaries filled the vacant places.
So a vacuum was created. A vacuum was created, which they just walked into, is what you're saying. And they used what was in existence, including the coins that were there. And these coins,
exactly.
But they were minting them. These were not the Byzantine coins that were being minted. These were Arabs minting these coins. Those
exactly. But what it shows us is that the rulers, the Arab rulers, were still in their mind in a sort of Byzantine Empire. You talk, for example, about some countries in Africa who still uses the franc, the CFA franc. When the decolonization took place in the 20th century, in those countries, there might have been some battles and fights, but mostly what happened is that the French left, but the administration, the structure of power was left in place. And the one who took the power then, the Africans who took the power then, were people who were raised in a French fashion. They were taught how to use the administration in the French way, and all they did was fill in the gaps. And we still have nowadays in those countries a very French-like regime, with French-like institutions, French-like governments, French-like way of doing stuff. And what I'm telling is, this is exactly what happened in the 7th century in the Levant, and I think also in Persia, in the Sassanid Empire, where the Arabs who took the power did not impose an Islamic power, a new power, but they took on the clauses of the former empires with in a sort of agreement with them. There were battles, there were fights also, but for example, the Byzantine Empire, it decided to leave the Levant. He decided after the Yarmouk battle that there was nothing left to do here. He left Jerusalem to them. Jerusalem is not any place. It's the most holy place for Christians. And he decided to leave it to a new class of rulers, but who were sort of affiliated to him. And the very proof of this is the coinage they used. And like you said, it is not, those coins were not minted in the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople. They were minted in the Levant under the authorities of those new Arab rulers. Mm-hmm. They were the one who chose to put crosses. They was the one who chose to keep the Byzantine Empire pattern, which says that they were still under the Byzantine Empire influence. And it's not just about this, the coin I just showed. Up until Abdul Malik, up until the very end of the 7th century, we have only coins that are based on Byzantine Empire patterns in the West or Sassanid Empire patterns in the East.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. And as you're going through, what I'm hoping is the coins actually will give us a sequence of what was really happening going right up until the time of Abdul Malik.
Exactly. Here, for example, with this coin, we have a quasi-exact copy of a Byzantine coin. We don't have any Arabic inscriptions yet. It is almost the same as the one I showed you before, as this one, for example. Mm-hmm. It is almost the same. Mm-hmm. But we will see that it will not be the case for every coin. Here I have to, I get back to the graph, and I want to introduce the figure of Umar ibn al-Khattab, which is supposed to be the third ruler after Muhammad, the second caliph. And there is something very strange with this particular character. We saw the coin here that might very well have been minted under his authority. We don't know when it was minted, between 640 and 660. Umar died. He was assassinated in 644. So he might have used this coin here. But what I want to insist on is the name he was given in the tradition, which is a very, very odd name. Is Al-Farouk. Al-Farouk in Arabic and also in Aramaic, because I think it comes from Aramaic. It means the one who divides, the divider, who divides between right and wrong. And especially in Aramaic, this is a title who was given to the Messiah himself. The Messiah was the one who was supposed to judge humanity and to separate, to divide between right and wrong. So Al-Farouk is not like, it's a bit like Muhammad. It's not any name. It's a very messianic name. it should pertain to someone who is very close to the Messiah or claims to be the Messiah himself. And when you look at the sequence, some people or one man was named Muhammad, and the one who came after him was also named Al-Faruq, the Savior. And we also have in the Islamic tradition mentions of Muhammad being also called Al-Faruq. And we have also mentions of Ali in the Shiite tradition being called Al-Faruq himself. This is I saw this in an article from Robert Kerr, excuse me, pardon my French. And it is very interesting because at this very time, during the 630s up to the beginning of the 640s, there was an unbelievable event that took place in Jerusalem. So the Arab conquered Jerusalem with the help of people who were described as Jews. I think so. Those were the Nazarene Jews, the Judeo-Nazarenes we talk about, the Quranic Nazarenes. And together, they rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. This happened at the end of the 630s, and it is an extraordinary event. People always think that there had only been 2 temples in Jerusalem, but the third one was rebuilt there. We have lots of sources telling us this. And I think it pertains to the coming of the Messiah. Those people at this time thought that the end of times, the apocalypse, was there, and they were about to trigger it by rebuilding the temple, reinstating the true Judaism, the Orthodox Judaism from Moses, restarting the sacrifices at the temple, and by having a true Judaism in place in Jerusalem, they thought that the conditions were met and that Jesus would come back to fulfill his mission as the Redeemer, the Savior, the one who would destroy all evil on earth, destroy all evil people, that he would lead the armies of the believers into battle, and that it was to exterminate all evil-doing people. And so the people believing that Jesus was to do this were supposed to have the first places in his new kingdom, in the new kingdom of justice, the kingdom of God on earth. And this is something that we need to get a very thorough look at. What does it mean to help someone to save the world? What does it mean to have the third temple in Jerusalem built or rebuilt? It means a new era. It means the Messiah would come. It means he will establish his kingdom of justice. He will establish God's kingdom on earth. And it means that Umar and the people who were with him building this temple were kind of the Messiah's auxiliaries, and they were to lead in this new kingdom. See, it was kind of a revolution, a bit like in 1917 in Russia, where a new kingdom was to be made, and all of evil will vanish, and it will be the singing mornings, the mornings that sing, according to Lenin. And I think it was kind of the same during this time in Jerusalem. But what happened is that the Messiah did not come back. And so Umar's title, which was also given to Ali, according to the Shiite tradition, it kept on in the Muslim tradition, in the Islamic tradition, but the Arab rulers after Umar were not given this title, apart maybe from Ali. So it ended there, the savior, the Al-Faruq name. Ali, there are some very interesting traditions in the Shia tradition about him. Like I said, all those people were waiting for the Messiah to return, but as we know, he did not return. And Ali was quoted as saying that Jesus spoke through his mouth. And so we can gather from this that he realized, Ali, that Jesus was not coming, but he didn't want to give up on his political dream of God's kingdom on earth. And he kind of took it on himself to say, I am the Messiah. Jesus speaks through my mouth. And I will lead the people for establishing the new kingdom. I will establish God's kingdom on earth. And this title, this characteristic of Ali, was passed along the Shia traditions, and the Shiite imams, the 12 imams for the 12ers and or the 7 imams for the other, or the 5 imams for the other Shiites, kept on believing that the revelation continued through them. And this is very specific to the Shia movements, but we will see that this has something to do also with the Abbasids. But let's get back to the evidence and the coins.
Before we go, go back to that screen again. Just so you're going to confuse an awful lot of people here. Are you suggesting then that Umar and Ali of the Islamic tradition are the same Umar and the same Ali? You're not doing that here. Just so people know.
I'm not doing this.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting anything. What I did is look at the Islamic narrative with a critical mind. Yeah. And try to make something out of it, especially by looking at what is very odd in it.
So just so people won't get confused, because I know that they're going to say, so you now you're contradicting yourself, because now you're saying the Standard Islamic Narrative is wrong, but now you're actually quoting the Standard Islamic Narrative, and you're now you're positioning yourself behind Umar of the Standard Islamic Narrative, the second caliph, and Ali, the fourth caliph. So just so people know that you're not at all supporting the Umar or the Ali of the Standard Islamic Narrative. Umar, as we know, is from Iraq, and we know, so therefore he's not the Umar of Medina.
We don't know really where he came from, because you see, Umar is described as being he was a lumberjack. He cut trees in forests. Okay. And he has family. I think his grandfather was from Syria.
Was he from Medina? Do they have trees to cut in Medina?
Not very much. Even less in Mecca, and even less in Mecca.
So he's not the Umar of the Standard Islamic Narrative, which is Umar, the caliph, the third caliph, who lived in. I'm sorry, the second caliph who lived in Medina, way down in the Hijaz. Is Ali from Medina?
I don't think so. I think Ali was from Kufa, not Kufa, but Al-Ira in Mesopotamia, which is nowadays Kufa.
Yeah, which is just southwest of Baghdad. I'll put it on a map here so people can see. Here it is. This is where Kufa is. And where would you say that Umar was cutting down these trees?
I think it was from Syria.
Okay, so let's put that on a map here. So he is.
I think it was from Syria. This is what I got from a French book from Elawardi, who was published last week, which is called Les Caliphs Maudits, the doomed caliphs.
Okay.
And she did a fantastic work of looking at the whole of the Islamic tradition. You see, when we are talking about the Standard Islamic Narrative, we are talking about an Islamic narrative that has been standardized in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, and even thereafter. But the Islamic tradition is much more than the standard Islamic narrative. And in it, we find many, many things that are very odd. For example, in the Islamic tradition, we find that Muhammad baptized Umar. Can you believe it? He baptized Umar. So what does it mean? Were they Christians or kind of Christians? It's in the Islamic tradition. Ella Wardi put it in her book. She's from Tunisia, and she's doing a fantastic work. This is her fifth book on the Islamic tradition, and it's amazing. This book is only about Umar's story. It's called Meurtre à la mosquée, Murder in the Mosque, Murder at the Mosque, which pertains to Umar's fate, his assassination at the mosque.
Okay.
To answer your concern, so no, I am not abiding by the standard Islamic narrative. Okay. What I am doing here is putting it to sort of test, the test of a critical mind. We see in the standard Islamic narrative what fits with what we know from hard evidence, with what we know from the context. We have a look at what seems odd, what seems in this narrative to be in contradiction with what should be. For example, Umar being a lumberjack in Syria. This contradicts the idea that everything happened way further in Medina or in Mecca. And for example,
no trees, the title, all desert, there's no water, there's no vegetation. So this would not make sense. And that's why that's why you need it's important that we do make these and we make these clarifications for people who are watching. Okay.
But for example, the title Al-Faruq, do you realize what it means to be Al-Faruq? It means to be the equal of Jesus. No one else, apart from Ali and maybe Muhammad, was given this title in the tradition. This does not fit the Islamic way of thinking. Humans are supposed to be humble before God. They are not the one who will save the world, who will claim to be Al-Faruq. Al-Faruq is a title which should be given to the Messiah when he will come back. And so Umar, bearing this title, tells us that he was maybe not the Messiah himself, but he was close enough to the Messiah, to the return of the Messiah, and that there is something messianic in him. And this is what I wanted to point out. This is why I put it in the graph.